Fitzgerald. I'm an LCSWA practicing EFT in Durham, North Carolina. And here with me today is Dani Leah Strauss. Hi, Dani.
Hi, it's so good to be here.
Thank you so much for making time to talk to me. I'm really excited about getting to talk to EFT therapists in North and South Carolina for the Carolina Center for EFT. And I'm just hoping, will you just sort of describe your practice and your scope?
Totally, yes. So my name is Dani. I use she, her pronouns. I was born and raised in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and am now practicing in Carborough. And I'm a queer, sex-positive EFT and somatic therapist. I use sort of a combination of attachment work and sensorimotor embodiment work to help folks find their way back into themselves, find their way back into the joy of being in a body and being in connection with their own eroticism and sexuality, and how that sort of interfaces with partners, or just other people or relationships or projects in the world. I have an amazing therapy practice with my colleague and dear friend, Ray Dooley, called Whole Being Therapy, that's rooted out of Durham. And our goal was really to create, before the pandemic, a physical space, now a virtually embodied space, right? Where we as young queer folks would have felt really comfortable, because we both had searched long and far to find therapists who could kind of hold space for the entirety of our beings and our queerness and our curiosities about ourselves and the world. And so it was our goal to make a space where people felt incredibly welcome wherever they were coming from.
Awesome. And as you said, you're a queer therapist. I'm a queer therapist. What does queerness mean to you?
Yeah, it's changed, right? This is Theo the cat. He'll be a part of our interview today. It's changed over the years, right? I mean, I think when I was a young person, queerness was a lot about like sex and intimacy and who I was feeling alive around, right? Which is often the way that we get introduced to the idea of queerness. But as I'm doing this clinical work and as I have found more facets of my own queerness, I've really refined it to mean creativity and a capacity to create a place for oneself that is outside the systems of oppression and power that we often are asked to operate within.
Yeah. I think that's so beautiful and also so expansive.
Yeah, I think one of my big goals in this work was to invite people who did not think that they had a right to the label queer, or did not have any sort of engagement with the idea of queerness, into that umbrella, right? And to really embrace the language of queerness and of queer family and of queering, like queering being a verb, right? That we can queer anything when we are imagining it beyond the cis heteronormative parameters of, you know, the patriarchy and white supremacy that we operate within in so many, in all of the spaces in this country. So it feels really radical. It feels really like a part of resistance of some of these more normative tropes about how we're supposed to move through the world, who we're supposed to sleep with, how we're meant to show up in our bodies, to invite everyone to sort of like be an artist in their way of imagining who they want to be and actually creating a life that is in alignment with that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So then while we're talking about queering EFT practice, how do you conceive of that, and how do you see queerness showing up in the therapy room or the video chat, however you're doing it?
Totally. It's a room, you know, it's a container, and we have joyfully adapted as best we can, right? How do I see it showing up in the therapy room? Everywhere, right? I think it's like when we are looking for opportunities to expand the idea of what is possible we can find them everywhere. And a lot of times I find that folks are coming to therapy feeling stuck, feeling like there's one way for me to get to this place. I'm here and I have to get here. And, who am I to tell them where they're headed, right? I'm honoring where they're headed. And also, I think the idea of queering is saying, like, let's make some room for all of the different parts of you, for the parts of you that are here with us right now, also the parts of you that have kind of been like abandoned and left behind in the many years of traversing trauma and the world and interpersonal stuff, because it's hard to be a person with other people, right? This is the truth of attachment work, right?
Absolutely.
And that when we expand our lens almost like panoramically, this is what queering means to me, right? We start to be able to see that in embracing all these parts of self, particularly parts that have been stuck under the detritus of shame and guilt and really the boxes of normativity, we end up with a much more like integrated version of self, multiple parts woven together, so that by the time we maybe make it to the place that they were originally planning on going, or perhaps the journey changes somewhere along the way, getting there is not actually the goal in the end. That by the time we've done that integrative work, the goal is to be honoring all parts of self. And I think that in working with queer folks in particular, I feel a lot of emotion when I think about this, that like there are a lot of ways that our families of origin, the families that we're exposed to out in the world, all of the systems of power that impact us, not necessarily negatively, but just hold weight and value for us. They tell us that certain parts of us are very welcome and other parts are not so welcome. And I think that there is I'm not going to say, I can't speak for all queer people, certainly, but with every queer client I've ever worked with, there is at least one, if not a million, moments where someone or some system outside of them told them, put that away. Like, put that part away. That part is not the part we show people. That's the messy part, right? And so the idea of queerness in the therapy space means what we're saying is, not only was it not okay to have someone tell you to put that part away, but this is a space where we're going to really tenderly invite that part in, let it build some strength and stamina, and then actually celebrate that part. And the celebration is obviously the most fun part, right? But like, it's the building piece of like, that it really comes down to that shame and guilt and fear keep some of the most life-filled, numinous parts of ourself hidden. And so we experience a lot of pain and suffering from this, especially as queer folks, but really as anybody who experiences any marginalization in the world, right? And that to have a space where we can like radically encounter those parts and have someone like cheering us on and celebrating us and saying, oh, I see that too. I see that part of you, and let's water it and let's nurture it and let's notice how it's not sure whether it's safe here yet. Let's give it time. That this is deeply transformative. Truly, I can't speak for my clients. I'll say that like, I hope it's transformative for them. And what I can say is like, it's also really transformative for me as a clinician, as a queer clinician.
Right. And to have that integration and that radical love just opens such capacity for deeper and more authentic intimacy.
Yes.
That's just beautiful.
Yes. And I think for a lot of folks who grow up queer, we sort of learn that like, we're going to have to give something up. Right? We're not going to really be able to fulfill all of our capacity. And often that looks like giving up on the idea of having like secure, steady, joyful, celebratory, deeply embodied relationships, whether that's sexual or emotional or some combination of the two, right? And so a lot of it is also just like instilling hope of like that this is possible, that you are worthy of this. especially if the world has told you that you're not.
Yes. So while we're talking about sex and coming out of shame, how does sex positivity inform your approach to
Mm.
EFT?
I mean, sex is a terrarium, right? It's like this little ecosystem that you get to observe, and people come in and they have all of these details, and it's all so specific. And what we're really doing is we're looking at a microcosm, which is maybe a better word, but I love plants, so I'll say terrarium. A better word for what's happening in the whole, right? It's the center. And in some ways it is the center because people really care about it. So it's often something that motivates people to seek out help or support. Whereas maybe if they're having emotional strain or stress, they might invalidate. I mean, I've definitely done this to myself, right? Invalidate experiences of like, is this really worth seeking therapy for?
Right.
But there's something about sex that is very motivating, right? That gets people to therapy when sex is challenging or triggering or not embodied and joyful. And I like to think, and I don't know if this is really true, I mean, but I like to think that it's because we all innately actually know that we have a deep birthright of experiencing profound pleasure and intimacy and connection.
Yeah.
You know, and sex is such a beautiful platform for that, as relationship is, any kind of relationship, right? Especially a relationship outside of sort of the normative confines of what we, you know, often imagine.
Right.
And so what a beautiful thing to tend to. And it's so amazing how, so sometimes folks will come to me and they'll say, I want to talk about sex. You know, this is my main thing. But then we actually encounter there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt. So we end up talking about all these other things. But every time we'll sort of like learn a lesson or we'll realize something is important. And then we'll get to ask this really sweet question, which is, I wonder how this relates back to sex. and you know, right, that every time it really does, because how we're doing sex is also how we're doing everything else.
Yeah.
If we struggle to stay present in sex, we're probably struggling to stay present elsewhere, right? If we're like rushing as fast as we can to the finish line, this is probably like a procedural tendency that we're encountering in other places.
Yeah, for sure.
So the beauty of it is that it's a place to practice embodiment and connection. And it also, just by nature of the fact that we learn a lot of stuff about sex, right? Not such great stuff.
Right.
Stuff that makes us feel really like there's some part of us that we have to shield or hide.
Right.
There's also just something really life-giving about the permission to speak openly and honestly and transparently with another human being in a therapeutic setting about sex.
Yeah.
I mean, for many clients, they say, this is the first time I've ever asked any of these questions.
Wow.
And like, I feel so humbled.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this is such a sacred place to sit, to be the witness and to reflect back. Not only are your questions amazing, but your power is amazing. And your life force is amazing. And there is a way that we can harness these things to find fulfillment that is right for you, which might look very different from the sex or embodiment or relationships that other people are having.
How liberating. So my last question today is, what do you want other EFT practitioners to know about working with queer clients?
This is a really great question. I was sitting with a client yesterday, an amazing trans client, and they were sharing with me that after coming out as trans maybe 7 or 8 years ago, that they, you know, used an acronym with their family, AFAB, assigned female at birth, right? And that the family had no idea what they were talking about. And so we sat with like the grief of that, right? Of this, like, the internet, books, right? Like resources abound, that when we find out that a person that we love or care about has a queer identity of any kind, that we have an invitation to seek out knowledge and deeper knowing so that we might meet them there and they might not feel alone and lost, right? Because we all deserve support. And it struck me in that moment that like this client was not asking for much. They were just asking to be met and to have a little bit of effort demonstrated on the part of their family that said to them, you're important to us. So I think what I would say to EFT clinicians who are working with queer clients, or even maybe contemplating working with queer clients, but have some nerves and anxiety about doing that, is you're much closer than you think you are to being ready to do this work. The idea of having to gatekeep work or say like, we can only work with certain populations. Yes, sometimes a queer person wants a queer therapist, right? This is a real thing and this is okay. And someone's gonna tell you that if that's their priority, right? But if that hasn't been explicitly stated, then it might be that actually, as a therapist who has beautiful EFT training in attachment, attunement, relational work, that you actually have all the tools that you need. And that what it really requires in order to do this work is to go inside yourself and to find a part of you that aligns with the idea of queerness, that resonates in some way with the idea of creativity or living outside the box or living radically in a way that is authentic and truthful. Because if we as clinicians are able to connect to that, then we already are quite close to our queer clients. We're not going to know everything about them. So luckily we get to ask great questions, right?
Always vocab to learn.
Absolutely, yes. And that like asking a question with love and reverence and coming from a place of like deeply caring about someone is great, right? Questions are only a problem when they're coming from a place of defensiveness or anxiety, right? So I think what I would say is questions are amazing.
Yeah.
We can learn a lot from our clients, and that everybody is welcome to come to the table, right? If you, as a clinician, are willing to sit with and see the humanity and the deep desire for wholeness in a queer person, then perhaps maybe you are really able and ready, right? And that it's always beautiful to seek out supervision and support from a queer clinician so that you feel like you've got some rooting underneath you too.
Awesome. Dani, thank you so much for making time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
It's such an honor to be with you. Thank you, Rebecca.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.